This is the Headless Marketing Show. Hi, I'm Alex Belding, the co-founder of Webrick. Welcome to the Headless Marketing Show, a podcast all about digital marketing and e-commerce with a focus on emerging marketing technologies and methods. In each episode, we talk to marketing leaders as they outline their thoughts and visions around modern marketing and the future of the web. If you are interested in building great customer experiences online and creating strong digital marketing strategies, then this is a podcast you don't want to miss. The Headless Marketing Show is brought to you in part by our sponsor, Webrick. Webrick is a managed website service provider and delights their customers with custom websites that rank well in search and start conversations with their visitors. From e-commerce to blogging, Webrick has the right service level to meet your needs and exceed your expectations. Visit their website today to learn more at www.webrick.com. That's Webrick, WEBRIQ.com. Be sure to subscribe to this show wherever you find your podcasts. Today on the show, we have Kaya Ismail. Kaya Ismail is the founder of Wordify, and Wordify is a content marketing agency for SaaS and enterprise software vendors. Wordify is not just another content factory. Really, they integrate into and with marketing teams to build content-filled funnels that turn website visitors into MQLs and SQLs, marketing qualified leads and sales qualified leads. They provide services like content strategy, content marketing, and content repurposing. After an intro like that, you'd assume that when talking to Kaya, we'd have a big conversation on the topic of content marketing. And you'd be half right. You see, Kaya's firm, Wordify, is focused on helping headless content management systems, or CMS companies, define their own content marketing. And it is because of his close proximity to the world of headless CMS that I was most keen on having him onto the show. So in this episode, we talk a lot about headless CMS. I mean, it is the topic where we derive the name of the podcast, right? The Headless Marketing Show. If you've never heard of the term headless CMS or any of the ideas behind headless content management, then you're really going to find this show today to be very useful. Kaya does a great job of laying out the advantages and the reasons why a lot of companies are looking at headless content management to help them publish and create engaging user experiences and ultimately help them manage their content a lot better. There is some technical jargon in the episode, things like Jamstack, API, DXP, also known as digital experience platforms, and even the very concept of decoupling the front end of a website from the back end of a website, and thus using headless architectures, headless CMS. Fear not, this is not a show catered for developers. We are talking to marketers, right? So this is for non-technical people, and most of the show is about how the marketing world really should become familiar with the ideas and considerations of API-first tools, headless content management, what can be done for user experience when you build and publish websites and content experiences this way. But it is technical, so you will be able to find quite a bit of extra stuff, reading materials, diagrams, information in the show notes. So please feel free to head to the show notes. Find the details and information that are provided there. That should definitely help you get started on your journey into learning more about this space. But I also suggest getting into Google or your other, your favorite search engine and start researching this topic yourself, because there are a lot of ways that you can implement headless CMS, and there's a ton of information out there. Obviously, what we're going to cover in today's podcast is the tip of the iceberg, as we like to joke about, right? But at the end of the day, this is what the Headless Marketing Show is all about. We want to dig deeper into ideas, methods, technologies, really focus on helping to give marketers good insight and ideas that you can put into practice with the own experiences and campaigns that you are running for your brands. Marketing and technology and development all of these separate communities are really beginning to blend together. And our show, the Headless Marketing Show, is all about bringing that together and creating a good jumping off point for us all to become familiar and understanding what is possible with modern methods online today. So I hope you have a chance to really dig in and listen to this, but without any more mumbo jumbo and without any further ado, let's bring Kaya into the show. Today on the show, we have Kaya Ismail. He is the founder of Wordify. And in his own words, Wordify works to turn software vendors into thought leaders, basically through content marketing. Kaya, thank you for being on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex, for having me. Pleasure.
Absolutely. So in our quick conversation, you were kind of saying that you've been in the headless CMS space for a while. How long have you been doing headless content management?
So good question. There's two questions there. The headless CMS space itself has only been around for maybe 5 years.
Right.
I've been in the CMS space for 8 to 9 years, which is quite kind of incredible to think about, but it's true, I think. As a journalist, I myself have not been necessarily a practitioner of using headless CMSs, for enterprise company or large company, anything like that. I'm also not a technical person, but I've been in this space as a journalist, as a commentator, somebody who attends those events to sort of figure out what's going on, what trends, what's new, and that kind of thing. And we've been doing that. I've been doing that for about 8 to 9 years. Me and my team. We launched Wordify in 2016, and since then it sort of formalized my involvement in the industry. Excuse me. And like you mentioned, we help those kind of vendors, those headless CMS vendors, with their content marketing, their content strategy, their messaging, and the actual, the sort of production of the content itself too.
Right, and you've been doing that since 2016? So kind of
Correct.
The beginning of headless CMS, right?
Yeah.
Or early days.
Exactly. I remember actually the first couple of clients we were discussing this new term, headless CMS. It was new. Some of the clients at that point were saying, hey, we don't like jumping on the bandwagon with these new terms. We want to set ourselves apart from the crowd. And I had to convince them at the time that, sometimes you have to be on that bandwagon to get, from my perspective, search engine traffic, right? Organic traffic from search engines. I was saying, hey, I know you don't want to do this from a sort of, a branding perspective necessarily. You don't want to sort of follow this, jump on this bandwagon. But if we don't have content that's catered towards that keyword, which is clearly growing in terms of search volume, if we don't do it, we're going to miss that train, so to speak. So thankfully, I managed to convince one particular client, and they benefited quite a lot. So that was great for them.
Yeah. And so then you guys focus as content marketers. I mean, have you niched into only working with headless CMS providers? Like
Yes.
Folks like
sorry to interrupt you, but yes, that's how we position ourselves. I know our website, you just read our website sort of tagline, which is software vendors, but we only really target and speak to and go out of our way to interact with headless CMS vendors, DXP vendors, CMS vendors in general. And often, and sometimes we'll get like an adjacent industry like e-commerce, or we've got a few clients in the API industry, like API security, that kind of thing. So adjacent industries. But generally speaking, we very much like to focus on CMS and DXP vendors.
Rad, very cool. So are you helping them kind of communicate their whole strategy, or just in like, are you development focused with your content? Because that's one of the things that this is a loaded question, but I've kind of really come to the realization that, like, if you say headless CMS to a chief marketing officer, for example, they have no idea what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah.
If you bring it up to a developer, they're like, oh yeah, that's cool, right? So like, are you helping to maybe are you focused on more of that technical content for the development community? or are you helping them kind of reach, the marketing world?
That's a great question, and it's something that we discuss a lot, and we have tried to build our team around this question actually. And a lot of the time it's both. So clients will say to us, "Hey, we want to talk to," because CMOs and marketing and business people within enterprises and large companies, they're very much part of the technology buying process. Whereas maybe 5 to 10 years ago, they were less party to that decision, right? It's always a CTO making that decision, and the marketing team, like it or lump it, as we say in London. This is what we've got, right? But nowadays, CMOs have a more active role. Obviously, marketing teams will come to this, I'm sure, because they're so involved in creating content, digital content at scale for different channels. They have to be involved in that technology selection process. So a lot of our clients say, hey, we want some content to be geared towards business people, marketing people who are non-technical. And we also want some of that technical content to speak to the technical people and the CTOs and who want to know about Jamstack and what GraphQL is and all these other things. And at the same time, we need to, for the non-technical crowd, we need to take those concepts, or maybe even just the concept of headless CMS, as you mentioned, is not easy to grasp for many. We need to take that concept, break it down, explain it in a way that says, hey, marketers, here's a benefit you'll get from this technology and how you'll use it on a day-to-day basis. And this is why it's going to be beneficial for you to use in contrast to a more traditional CMS like a WordPress or something like that.
Yeah, it's a similar mission here at Webrick, right? Is like, we really want to build a relationship with marketing. And if you talk about headless CMS sometimes, so in your worldview, what are the benefits that marketers can really get by using a headless content management system versus a more monolithic one?
Good question. There's a few. I'll try to touch on a couple of them. The first is if you're talking about enterprise companies and large companies who want to produce content for more than just one channel. So for more than just a website and maybe a mobile application. So if they want to produce content that's going to go into their next in-person event, I know maybe not this year, but in maybe next year, it'll be in-person events again, where there's like digital signage, that kind of thing. They want to launch an Alexa skills app or something like that, or even just, different types of experiences that are not necessarily on the website or a mobile app, which there are plenty of, in vehicle, Teslas now, almost all new vehicles got, in vehicle displays, and you can produce experiences for that. So if you're a company who's looking at those avenues and different channels and saying, okay, how do we manage our content so that we can not only increase the amount of content we're going to be producing on our website, because that's another issue. You now need more content on your website than ever before. You need more, whether it's like blog posts or whatever industry you're in. This is true, and it's maybe a separate issue. But that, as well as all the other channels, you need a content management system that's going to be able to handle all of those channels without duplicating your work, right? So traditionally, if you wanted to make content or publish content on a new channel or new device, like maybe an Apple Watch or a Alexa, you need a different software for that, right? Like WordPress isn't built to handle that. You need something, you need to buy this product and that product. And again, similarly, if you want to do something for digital signage, you may go and specifically buy digital signage software just for that specific use case. What Headless CMS does is it allows you to keep all your content in the same place. All your content for all your channels is all in the same place. And it actually delivers that content via APIs to any, I suppose at this point, APIs, it doesn't really matter what they are, but you just know that it can deliver APIs to any, you can deliver them to any channel or touch point. So whether it's an Apple Watch or a voice activated device or website, it can deliver that content anywhere. And without you having to duplicate that content or re-input it into a different software, it's all there within the headless CMS. And that headlessness means that it doesn't have that connection to the front end. Like again, if you use WordPress again, the content it has a head on it because it's linked to that WordPress template. I think most marketers are very familiar with WordPress templates or themes. You can't really take that content out and put it somewhere else, right? It's coupled with it. So decoupled is coupled with that. What Headless CMS does is it decouples that content. It takes it away from the website template and says, hey, it can still go to the website template, but it can also go absolutely anywhere else. So it allows marketers to say, okay, great. So we can just produce content now at scale and we'll figure out where it's going to go after. Bingo. Without any restrictions, limitations, and having to buy additional software. So that's one huge benefit. Another benefit, it doesn't escape my mind. I got way too deep into that. I forgot my second point. So it'll come back to me, I'm sure.
You did a great job of, just kind of outlining, what it is like to publish content via API versus, the more traditional approach where you have to, you're stuck on a platform, right?
Yeah.
So I always try to like approach it. It's like deplatforming your content, right? Like you're not stuck with this same antiquated tool. You can put your content anywhere.
Exactly.
One of the things that I've been really trying to preach as well, and you might enjoy this, is that you can get rid of, what's the best way to describe it? You can basically turn your content into a component-based model versus a pages-based model. So even if you only publish content on a website, you can kind of break out of having to deal with themes and templates and a very rigid structure to your content. And instead, you can treat your content in components, and then you can, on the fly, you can create landing pages faster, microsites faster. You can do all more, you can really get a lot more granular with your content.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Which again helps marketers, but the minute you say API, like what I've really struggled with is like, how do you get around the API side of it, right? Because that's where like you lose people, right? Very quickly.
That's why I didn't want to sort of start defining what it is. I mean, there's no point. And really, the best way is to just leave it at that and say there's a technology called APIs which allows your content to go anywhere. That's the best way to do it. I think everybody can understand that concept. What you said is fantastic and really, really important. And it links to what I forgot. So it reminded me. So, this whole sort of granular or you called it sort of components, right? I like to think of it as like building blocks. So you can have building blocks of content that can then go anywhere. So if your marketing team, again, if you want to launch 10 microsites next year, right? So they need content for all these microsites. Typically, you need to rewrite that all over again, get it approved by the right departments, approved by editors as well, that kind of thing, and then get it out there. It can be a slow process. With a headless CMS, what you can do, because it's like this sort of content repository or content hub where content can live, all your content can live, you can say, okay, this block of content, which talks about our specific service number 2, one of our services number 2, whatever that company may be, we've written this, approved it, it's there, it's 300 words worth of content. Legal likes it, branding likes it, everyone likes it. And so it lives in the headless CMS. So now whenever we launch a microsite that's about service number 2, that block is there to go. And when we're going to launch our in-person event with digital signage, we can take from that content and put it there. And so you can use these sort of reusable blocks or building blocks of content to, like you mentioned, build microsites a lot faster, landing pages, and pretty much any experience very, very quickly. And again, because it's in the same place, the headless CMS, and it can go anywhere, there's no restrictions on it. So it's like having building blocks that can go anywhere and build anything, really. While being approved, or pre-approved, pre-edited, there's no going through that whole workflow again. So it's super, super fast and efficient. Another thing that you reminded me of is a headless CMS can help solve a problem for marketers, which a lot of marketers have already, which is a problem of content silos, where a lot of their content lives in different apps. Dropbox. You've got maybe some of the stuff is in Canva, and other stuff is in Google Drive. Some of it is WordPress, some of it is over here. So what can happen in that situation is that things get lost, things get forgotten about. I forgot we had a landing page for that service. I just rewrote one. I spent 2 days rewriting a landing page. We already had one. I forgot it was in Google Drive. So that kind of stuff happens a lot. Duplication of content, duplication of work. Obviously, it's not good for the bottom line of the company. And it's not good for marketers who end up rewriting the same thing over and over again, losing stuff. So these are like silos of content where things go missing, or maybe that piece of content is not compatible with this software, so it's got to be rewritten anyway. A headless CMS, it says, okay, bring all that content in here into our central content repository, and we can just push it wherever it needs to go. So you can do away with your Dropboxes and your Google Drives and other for this purpose anyway, for the content purpose, and have it all in the same place. So that way you can see all the content you have, categorized, tagged, however you like it to be. And as you mentioned, they're sort of there as building blocks ready to go.
Yeah. Well, and again, you just described in a really good way what is often said by the developer community, right? Single point of truth, which is, again, like a phrase that marketers have never heard of, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you just did a great job of delivering that kind of value statement, right? Like, it is, you can get rid of, one, I was talking to, a chief technical officer at a very large company. He's like, I love my marketing team, but if they would just stop copying and pasting crap all over the place, you know, and that's the beauty of a headless CMS, is that you can stop the behavior of, hey, we've now got the same piece of content in 19 places, you know, just versioning control alone is done, right? You don't have to mess with that. And then you can, you know, then you can treat that content like data, which is, again, a scarier term for marketers. Not scary, but just something that doesn't really resonate with them. So that's, I mean, earlier before we started recording, you had said, like, who are you? That's what I'm trying to do with this podcast, is kind of bring the Jamstack methodologies, you know, API approach to stuff, to the marketing world, because you said earlier, which is very, very true, you know, marketing is now extremely involved in buying the tech stack, but unfortunately their value systems, or at least, you know, their knowledge of technology, often means that they are recommending and, you know, leaning towards tool sets that aren't modern, at least not in the complete capability of the cloud and what can be done nowadays.
Yeah. It's a very good point. And there is this disconnect. There's always been a traditional disconnect, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon, of, you know, developers wanting to use those cutting edge technologies. They want to be on a Jamstack. They want to be able to use, you know, Next and Nuxt and React for different projects, and they want to mix and match to make sure they're getting the most out of every project, and using their favorite tools. And marketers are like, I don't know what that means. I just want a good place to produce my content and edit it and see it previewed and modify it without needing to ask the IT for help. And I think, at least from what I can see from our existing clients, marketers are slowly understanding that modern headless CMSs, maybe not headless CMSs of 4 to 5 years ago, but more modern hybrid headless CMSs are offering them that, while at the same time the developers are happy too. And I think that happy medium is finding its place in the market.
Right. Yeah, because one of the things that I find, like, you almost have to do if you're promoting headless content management is you have to figure out how to deal with WordPress, right? Because if you ask a marketer, you know, how should I publish content onto the internet, you know, 8 out of 10 are going to bring up WordPress. The other 2 are going to say Wix or Squarespace or something like that, right? Yeah. And so, like, how do you, like, kind of awaken them to this new frontier? So when you're working with a headless CMS customer of yours, you know, what are some of the things that you're trying to do to kind of create value systems for the marketing people?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. And it does depend a lot on what that particular vendor has to offer, the marketing vendor, right? So again, 4 years ago, there wasn't much there. And I actually wrote an article on this, again, may have been 4 years ago now, on cmswire.com. And it was called Headless CMS Vendors, Please Think of the Marketers, right? Because there was almost no vendors at that time who had any sort of WYSIWYG or drag and drop system or anything that a marketer would be familiar with to help them get content out.
Right.
So I think that's changed. Like I mentioned a minute ago, I think that's changed for most vendors, and for the ones that haven't changed, they've got plans in the work, right? Plans in the working plans. It's coming. So and what that means is, again, drag and drop, being a marketer being able to modify content and publish content without needing to ask IT to come and help them do that, doing it autonomously. So that's almost, if it's not there throughout the entire industry, it's there for most of the industry. Bar a few vendors who specifically want to stay as developer tools. So if we're dealing with clients who have those capabilities, it's just about communicating the fact that, hey, you can come in here and still use tools that you're familiar with, i.e. WYSIWYG, drag and drop. You can preview content, editing inline. If the vendor allows for that, then that's usually the go-to, that we say, hey, all these tools that you love and have used over the years are here, but at the same time, you're going to get even more freedom from having to sort of, ask IT every turn what's happening next and what, how to do certain things. while at the same time you're going to still get that environment again, like I mentioned, WYSIWYG, drag and drop you're so familiar with, just allowing you to be autonomous with the content you're going to produce. So that's the go-to. The only thing that stops that is, does that particular vendor have those features ready to go at the time of the content is being produced?
Well, and that's all well and good, right? I always try to tell marketers as well, like, what is the actual benefit to WYSIWYG, right? Like, are you actually getting benefit, or is it just, kind of like your whoopee, like a blanket from your childhood that you're still holding on to, right? Like,
it's a good question. Unlike developers, marketers don't like much change, right? So we want, and I'm a marketer, so I know, we want to see the tiny MC editor and that kind of thing. We want to see, a dashboard that we're familiar with, essentially, like a WordPress dashboard that's not in WordPress because of WordPress's restrictions or flaws. So it's a good question. I think for different marketers to give you different answers to that. But I think at a certain point, it doesn't really matter. I think that the real issue here is that the market demands it. The intention behind it is secondary. Marketers want it. That's what they're asking for in sales calls, from what I can gather. And so that's what has to be done. That's what has to be given to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that's familiar, right? So, and that's something that we've been, kind of messing around with for a long time within our company, is how do we, as developers and designers and DevOps teams, make marketing happy. And the Jamstack, like, as far as like the organization, has not done very much, or at least hasn't provided many favors, right? Like, if you show a marketing person, jamstack.org, right, by developers, for developers, they're like, well, where do I fit in here, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same token, I have found that, like, it may not be, like, sometimes, like, the folks that are involved in the branding and kind of graphic and really art side of marketing are much harder to convince. But if you just go talk to, content writers and publishers and the people that are much more in, like, the trenches of content marketing, are like, it's basically like using WordPress without all the fluff and the stuff that I can break, I just publish content, right? Which is, if I'm adding a blog, I don't need to see a preview. Like, what's the benefit, right? It just wastes my time. I know if I publish using the CMS, it's going to look great, right? And once they get over that hurdle, then, we find folks are, publishing like crazy, right? Which is what they're supposed to be doing, is publishing content.
Yeah, I agree. And like I mentioned before, things like the content silos being taken care of, it suddenly frees up time for marketers to say, hey, I've got, I'm not worrying about where all my content is anymore. It's right there in front of me. Let me just make more content, right? And so that's generally what happens. It's true.
Yeah. So, it's like, we've talked a bit about headless content management. You mentioned earlier digital experience platforms, which I think is maybe where, what maybe one of the more exciting frontiers for what Jamstack is going to be capable of, and is capable of. To folks that are hearing that phrase, or even like starting to play around with the idea of personalization, what are some of like grandiose ideas like the future holds, and then what are something that's more tangible in the short term that can be done, relatively quickly using a headless CMS and kind of developing a digital experience platform?
Yeah, so I don't envy the marketers who are just trying to sort of dip their toes into this industry, because there's so many different acronyms and words and stuff like that, and they're always something new is always coming about. So right now we're looking at composable DXP as a new trending term.
I've never even heard of that one. Yeah, that's new to me.
It's new. It's quite new. It's I doubt it will take off in any serious way, but it's being used by Gartner and some others. But your question, so building a DXP. So firstly, a DXP, digital experience platform. There are a few different definitions out there. The one I like is if you've got a headless CMS, very few headless CMSs are digital experience platforms in the sense I'm about to describe, which is a digital experience platform is essentially something that handles your entire digital properties or digital footprint as a company. Your headless CMS, as that sort of content repository that has APIs that can push content out anywhere and pull content in anywhere and data in anywhere from anywhere, that is usually the best foundation or the first sort of building block for DXP, right? It's the best thing to start building from. At that point, you can start connecting different tools like CRM. You can throw in, Salesforce, for example. You can throw in your email newsletter system. You can throw in all the systems you've got, product information management if you're e-commerce, all the different systems that you need to run your digital experience. You can start connecting them to your Headless CMS, where the Headless CMS is like the sort of central core. And again, you can start pushing content where it needs to be pushed to, pulling data, customer information where it needs to be pulled in from, pulling product information, for example. And that way, because with this sort of these APIs going between these different systems and platforms, that content information could move around much more quickly and smoothly. And that's how you build this digital experience platform. The way I'm describing it is like a best of breed way, right, which is, picking out the best tools that your company likes, or that, maybe a third party has ranked the best tools. You pick the best one of the market. We're going to use this CRM. We're going to use this newsletter platform. We're going to use this e-commerce platform connected to our Headless CMS. And boom, we've got, 7 different softwares working together to communicate with each other. And that's our DXP. We built our own DXP. So that's how I like to think of a DXP. There are some Headless CMS vendors, these sort of larger suite vendors, who say, hey, the whole DXP is in our one package. We've got everything you need in here for the most part. And so, we've built it for you. It's a suite rather than a best of breed. And there's obviously debate around which is best. But yeah, I hope that helps. I know it's a little bit convoluted, but I hope that helps.
Well, and I'm definitely in the camp of building your own, right? Because, it's counterintuitive. Like if you're just going to go back to the monolithic system where all of these decisions have been made for you, and out the box, it's almost too good to be true in a lot of ways. Or it works today, but 16 months from now, when it's all different, now you're stuck. You're in the same place you are stuck in WordPress. It's a different vendor, right? And I love the phrase best in breed. I always try to describe it like, instead of picking a pet, right? You have you're building a herd of cattle, which kind of almost fits with best in breed,
Yeah, because that's interesting.
A pet is super unique, right? Like you have to hand feed the thing. It's all there. Like if it dies, you have a huge problem. Whereas cattle, you could change, right? You could change Headless CMSs. You could change CRMs. You could change, e-commerce engines.
Yeah.
And you're much more fluid, right?
Exactly. And again, from what I'm seeing from people I speak to in the industry, that's where the market is heading. Companies are moving away from the monoliths and the suites, and they're moving towards a best of breed approach, essentially. And it's not surprising with COVID just still with us, really. You need that flexibility, the ability to pivot and change. Maybe now you don't need a specific software because your in-store experience is now totally different or non-existent for the next 6 months. So that software you bought for that is no use. And if you've got a suite that is part of it, and you have to pay for it for however long your contract is, and you see how it can get difficult in certain situations. And also with the suite systems, another issue that is quite prevalent is buying it as a whole, and then you're only going to use 30 to 40% of the features that are in the box, right? So if there's AI powered personalization, it's like, okay, we're a large company, we do not have enough content for that kind of scale personalization anyway. We haven't got the people power to produce that kind of content. We're just not in a position to use AI powered personalization any point in the next 2 to 5 years. So if you're buying that, is there real usage there? Is there ROI there? Those are the kind of questions that companies should ask themselves when choosing these systems. And some companies will benefit from it. There are no doubt companies that are on that level and they have enough content to make use of that, but many don't, and they still sort of buy into this fully fledged platform that's quite rigid, and you're paying for a lot of things that you probably don't need.
Right. Well, and the nice part about the suite, right, is everything's been decided for you, and if it fits your niche, or if it's really aligned with what your brand has to offer, there's a lot to like, right? And you
Yes.
mentioned, right, like there's a lot of things to consider, like what's our technical capability, what kind of labor do we have internally, what kind of assets do we
Yeah.
have to bring to bear. Like another way to look at like a suite like that is it's like a glass slipper, right? If you're Cinderella and you fit your foot in there, it's a lovely experience, and you can go to market pretty quick, and you can have digital experience with really good personal up and running, right? Most companies are like the ugly stepsisters or the beautiful stepsisters, whoever you want to, they have to cut their bunions off. They're slicing their heel off to fit into the glass slipper. The glass slipper's too big and they're just getting crazy blisters in there. Where, it makes sense to create a bespoke system for them, but that's such a huge conversation. And a lot of people shy away from that, right? Like now we have to come up with our own plan. We have to do a lot of research.
Yes.
So
Go ahead.
well, like as you develop content strategies for your headless CMS clients, how do you maybe get around or help people start to get their hands around the strategy side of it, right? Because like that's basically Webrick's service, right? Like we talk to customers and we're like, we're going to build a stack for your brand, and we're gonna do it for you. But like my life would be so much easier if instead of every time having to like go research and do all this stuff, had it like if marketers were like, hey, I actually know this, and like so like I guess what I'm getting at is there a way in your guys' mind or in your content strategy that you're helping the marketing department get involved in the engineering of the stack, or is that still a bridge too far for marketing, and should that be left to the development teams?
That's an interesting question. It's not. I'll be frank. It's not something we tackle often about sort of how marketing specifically should go about building their stack. And I think for two reasons, mate. One reason is if they're coming from that sort of background where they've been using WordPress and they're now trying to sort of break free of that and try to be a bit more flexible with what they can do. They've typically already got their stack. Like they know what they want, and they know their favorite CRM. They've got this plugin with WordPress, that plugin with WordPress. So they know the names of, hey, I want to use this for our SEO tool and this for our email marketing tool. So a lot of time they know what they want, but with WordPress, it's so difficult when you're cobbling it together. Well, it's so easy at first, which is what makes it so tempting because the plugins are there. But then after 6 months, a year, 2 years, things break and this plugin interrupts that plugin. And so it breaks a lot of the time. So a lot of what I have the CMS vendor can say is, hey, we can integrate with those systems just as easily, but it's not going to break. Like they're not going to break each other. We're talking about interoperability rather than like a plugin where it's like, one integration will break another because, you added it in. It's not like that. So that's one way to sort of convince a marketing team that, hey, you can do what you're doing now, just a lot faster and a lot easier, even outside of content, just simply using the stack that you already have. The only issue is if they are coming from that sort of more monolithic suite system where, not to name names, but I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, those suite systems where everything's in one, and they haven't got a stack because they were using the stack of the suite, right? So at that point, it's difficult. But generally speaking, I'm not sure marketers have a problem choosing their stack. They just have a problem putting it together and making it work correctly, right? And saying, okay, how does this software work with this software? That's what they need, that technical guidance to say, okay, here's the sort of the strategy around actually implementing these and integrating them together. But I find most marketers they like the idea of choosing different plugins and softwares and watching videos and reading listicles on what's the best CRM and all that kind of thing. But the struggle is sort of making it work, going to IT department and saying, hey, I want to use this software. And they're like, what are you on about? This is like this ain't going to work. So that's probably where it's a technical side where it gets tricky for marketers, I think.
Right. Well, and like, because they're so reliant on plugins and the server, and they don't really realize they're reliant on those things. And then you're like, well, it's just APIs, just glue together whatever you want. But then they're like, well, what the devil is an API, right? And then then you give them that used and abused well, it's like a waiter in a restaurant. But
okay, I haven't heard that one actually. That one, the glass tipper, actually quite new. I love the glass tipper analogy.
But But at the end of the day, right? Like, I like the way that you just kind of most marketers have their like, their marketing stack figured out. Like, this is what we're going to use for email marketing. We're going to use this for customer relationship management. We're going to use, these other things for how we integrate with social. But then you're like asking them to build their web stack, and it's like, it can give them heart palpitations, right? Like, no, we just use WordPress and everything's right there. And like it will. And that's my favorite phrase with WordPress, by the way. WordPress is great until it isn't, and it's like abrupt, right? I mean, it happens overnight. It seems. Yeah. Because it is.
It's overnight, and it's like 0 to 60, and it's like, how has this much chaos erupted from one plugin being updated, or from a WordPress core update, which 7 of my plugins have been updated for 4 years? What's happening now? And it's suddenly like, my entire customer experience that relies on that one plugin, it just no longer exists. It doesn't exist in the world. It's gone. Like, it's really gone, because that plugin developer isn't coming back. Clearly, 4 years ago was the last update, and WordPress isn't going to. You can roll back your WordPress. You can go back to being WordPress you were last week, but now you've got security flaws now and the rest of it. And WordPress gets very, very tricky once it starts going south. It's almost there are times where it's almost impossible to sort of make it work again for a large scale company, at least. Right. Well, and even for any company, I mean, like, it becomes a total rebuild, right? And like, and that's, I think, that like the WordPress is the SLR, like like it's just the people assume that because it's WordPress, it's like this standard grade of access and anybody can come touch it. And realistically, no, it's like, we're gonna have to redo the whole thing. You might as well redo it in an API first way with a headless CMS, because there's just so much benefit to be had, right? Yeah. See that's where the developer that's where you need that duality of messaging, right? Because you need to convince developers, and most developers are convinced by now that that's the way forward. I think, or maybe all. But it's just about sort of explaining to marketers that these breakages, and sometimes it's difficult to explain until it happens. If it hasn't happened yet, if their plugins are still hanging in there, it can be a tough picture to paint that your WordPress site can break and almost be like broken forever, essentially. So if you can communicate that to them, and like you mentioned, just saying if you're going to rebuild it with APIs, if it never happens again, it's a no-brainer. It's just about getting them to understand that it's a very real possibility, and you don't want to be reacting to that happening. You need to be proactive before it happens. Yeah, because otherwise you could be, it could be an entire quarter before you're fixed, right? I mean, exactly. It's just the son of a gun of WordPress. Yes. So, what in your mind? What is the next big hurdle for the Jamstack community? API first, and how many other jargony things can we throw into this question? But realistically, what do you think is the next big hurdle to kind of go from headless CMS being kind of a niche topic, very developer-oriented topic, to becoming much more familiar with the marketing community and wider adoption? What do you think needs to happen? Yeah, it's a very good question again. So it kind of reminds me of the internet in the 90s, right? Or early 90s, maybe, where the technology was there and the technical people among us are loving it and they're getting benefit from it. But the non-technical people are like, what is that? I can't even understand how it's being used or what it's used for. And eventually what happens is the technology is the same, right? The internet is still the internet, it always was, but the user experience, the UI UX, actually, both of them together, is actually just constantly honed until it's palatable to everybody. So, your Facebook, your social medias, websites as we know them today, how simple and smooth they are, Amazon. So really, the technology is there, and it changes, of course, but generally speaking, we go through sort of eras of technology, and this sort of API first era is sort of only just beginning, really, from what I can see. Yeah, it's on the launch pad. So So now all that's left is just that second stage, which is to improve that UI UX, make it, as we said before, super palatable to marketers, familiar to what they're used to. And once that's done, once MySpace is dead and Facebook is born, if you want, we'll see that more adoption of the internet, more adoption of your Facebooks and your tools that are easy to use. And we're seeing this in the market, right? So there are a handful of developer vendors who have raised a serious amount of money in recent weeks and recent years. And they've specifically said that a lot of this is going to go towards our UI UX, like improving that marketer, non-technical person experience. So no code and low code, having those sort of no code experiences where, as we mentioned in this whole podcast, a non-technical marketer being able to go in, do their job, enjoy their job, not have content silos, not have to worry about talking to IT every 10 minutes, and just get things done quickly and in a way that they like and looks nice on the screen, which is important. That's that next hurdle that many vendors are jumping over right now, but most of the industry is yet to do so. And I think that's the next step. I think once that happens, this transition towards sort of API first platforms is going to accelerate.
Well, then to wrap up the show, and a final question to you would be like, for folks in the marketing world, that are listening to the podcast, in your opinion, who are some of the leaders in the headless CMS space that they should be paying attention to?
That's a good question. My good friend at Storyblock, Thomas Peaham, is somebody who speaks quite a lot in the industry and has himself a marketing background, so it could be quite a relatable person to look at. And this podcast right here seems fantastic.
Yeah. So Storyblock would be a CMS to check out. Any other CMSs that you like?
I'm not going to endorse any specific CMS. I just mentioned Thomas specifically, but there's plenty of CMSs out there. If you type in Headless CMSs, you'll find many of them vying for that top spot of Google. There's no shortage of them, and they've all got this technology we're speaking about, that API first architecture. But then they've got different approaches to that, and they've got different features and UI UX, as we mentioned. Different philosophies behind them, different teams behind them, and you should look at those and figure out which one is best for you. But there are a lot of good vendors out there for sure.
Yeah, it's been wild to watch the space grow, right? I mean, from Netlify and a Git-based CMS to now there's just, how many you could throw a stick and you hit one. So
exactly.
Well, Kaya, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate the insights and conversation on Headless CMS. Hope you enjoyed yourself, and hopefully we can have you on for a follow-up in the future.
I had a great time, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Headless Marketing Show. Be sure to keep coming back for more episodes and discussions with marketing leaders where we talk about e-commerce, digital marketing, and all things related to the web. Remember to subscribe to the Headless Marketing Show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find and listen to your podcasts. Quick shout out to our sponsor, Webrick, by which all of this is made possible. If you are looking for a website, go check out webrick.com. And that's the show, folks. Thank you very much for listening.